Hi, welcome everyone. Welcome to our session. Welcome to MBA Spotlight. We're thrilled to have you here. We have more and more people joining. That's so cool. So today we're hosting a panel with the current students dedicated to the topic, how much does MBA actually cost? And my name is Olga. I'm the moderator of GMAT Club, and I'm really, really thrilled to have our students today on the panel. And let's start right away, guys. Our guests and viewers, please don't forget to ask questions. We'll be picking up those questions during the session. And of course, I prepared some very interesting and sometimes tricky questions for our panelists today. So let's start with the introduction. Guys, why don't you introduce yourself? Just quickly tell at what school are you currently studying, what year, where you're originally from, and maybe the industry, where you're heading after graduation. We're really keen on getting to know you. Let's start with Marina.
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Marina. I currently go to UCLA Anderson, going to be a second year now. Originally from Fresno, California. I was recruiting for human capital and HR consulting, doing a internship in HR, and then I'm actually atypically going to be going to law school after MBA, so not recruiting for full-time, but going back to school. That's me.
Fantastic. Sid, welcome.
Hi, everyone. Nice to meet you. I'm Siddhant, originally from India. I'm currently pursuing the MBA from INSEAD. Started in January, so going to end in December. It's a shorter MBA. I was in consulting before this in Munich, and I'm switching geographies to Amsterdam with the same employer.
What campus are you based in?
I've been in Fontainebleau all along, and I'll be switching over to Singi for the second half of the year.
Fantastic. Welcome. Ivan.
Hi, I'm Evan. I go to UNC Kenan Flagler in Chapel Hill, North Carolina. I am coming from a family business in high-end art and furniture retail. I intend to stay in retail and do retail strategy after my graduation, and I'm currently interning with Amazon this summer.
Great, thank you everyone for joining. And let's start with the questions right away, and actually with the very basic question. Like probably lots of people know what is the tuition fee of an MBA program, but is it everything or are there additional costs? So what additional costs are there for an MBA? Just list something or something that you knew about before you started the program, and some hidden costs as well, which you just discovered while actually studying already. Let's start the other way around. So Ivan, why don't you start?
Sure. So definitely, I would say that Carolina's estimation for the tuition, obviously, and then also the cost of living is pretty accurate on the website. I have found that in my case, at least. I think in North Carolina in particular, our cost of living is very low. So the rent and all of those types of expenditures are fairly reasonable. And, I think typically there's a lot more socializing and going out, and there are costs that are associated with that. Unfortunately, we didn't have as much of that for this year with COVID. But speaking prior to this meeting, something that I consider, I guess, a hidden fee is that for my internship, I'm relocating, and that is going to add. So my lease in Chapel Hill and now my lease costs that kind of snuck up on me a little bit. But that's really the only hidden one that I can think of.
Great. Sid, how about you? What were your impressions? So probably relocation from France to Singapore would also cost quite some money.
100%, and especially when you're carrying 3 or 4 big suitcases, shipping is going to take like $1,000 on its own. So, but I think in terms of estimates, INSEAD's been pretty accurate with what they provide on the website. So on top of tuition, they say somewhere around 25 to 30,000 euros, depending on whether you take a car or not. That seems pretty much in line with how the year is going. I think rental costs are pretty high, both in France and in Singapore. So that's something to take into account. But other than that, I think, like Yvonne mentioned, socializing, trips, that's a bulk of your MBA expenditure that folks don't take into account. But then every now and then when there's a, $1,500 or $2,000 trip, you're going to go for it. So, might as well budget for it at the start of the year.
Marina, what was your impression so far?
Yeah, I mean, so I'd agree with everything that everyone else has said. Definitely social expenses add up. And I know we didn't have as much of it this year, but there were still some trips that were planned. And so a lot of coffee chats, a lot of money spent going, it adds up. I think the biggest thing for me that was hidden was the club dues. I didn't realize how much they were going to be. And I'm sure it's common at other schools, but especially at Anderson, people are very involved in clubs and they all cost like ranging from some are free, like the ones that are more like fun clubs usually are free, but some of them are not. Range from free to like a couple $100 for joining for a year or a couple of years. And so just something to budget in because usually like the professional clubs you have to pay for and you need those to help with recruiting. So I hadn't anticipated that. So I ended up doing a couple different recruiting tracks than I was planning just because I didn't budget properly for all of the clubs I wanted to join. But a lot of people also just said, I need to pay for these clubs. I need to recruit for them. So just something to keep in mind because I didn't realize that every club I would need to budget for.
Great, that's a great insight. And Marina, just picking up right there, what were your budgeting strategies? Like, how do you manage this? Yes, certain community pressure because like lots of people are spending money, so you kind of have to as well. How do you manage that? And do you set certain like boundaries or limits, caps for yourself on a monthly way? If you could talk a little bit more about this.
Yeah, sure. So I think I came in wanting to have a set amount of money I was spending, but I think it becomes very difficult, especially at least this past year with wanting to be more social, not being able to see as many people. So any chance that you would get to see people, you kind of want to go and you're willing to spend the money. And I think at least at our school, it tends to be common that people are more willing to go and be social and hang out with people. And especially joining the clubs, especially in this past year, it was a way to meet people. And so we were more willing to spend that money. But I think I kind of gave up on like my traditional budgeting strategies a little bit of just, yes, like I'm more willing, like this is 2 years of my life that I've dedicated to this. I knew that I was coming in and like, these are my goals and this is helping me get towards my goal. But for myself, I did have limits given that I am planning to go to school again for 3 more years, whereas some of my classmates will be making money sooner. So they were more willing. So for me, that's how I decided to, okay, not join every club. But a lot of my classmates decided, okay, I'm just going to join all of them. And that's kind of how they went about it. So mine was a little unique just because I have 3 more years of school later. But it tended to be most people I know, they had a hard limit of like, okay, I definitely won't pass this amount, but there was a little bit of flexibility with wanting to have a little more fun.
Ivan, did you cross your budget cap at a certain point? Did you exceed that? Or did you have it even?
You know, I think I actually agree with Marina. I tried to have a good idea of what I was willing to spend and what I was shooting to stay under, I guess. I will say that I bought all new clothes because, you know, back when we really weren't in the pandemic yet and I was planning ahead and there were great sales and I just went ahead and bought all these great new power suits and outfits for business school. So unfortunately that felt a little over budget but you know, they weren't used this year, so they're technically still new, which is great. So hopefully I'll stay within budget for next year in that regard. But like she mentioned, I was a little bit looser because I wanted to go on trips. You know, if I could, if our friends were going, there were ways to socialize that were safe and might have cost a little bit more money than I was anticipating spending, but ultimately were worth it. So I agree with her.
Sid, how about you? Did you have any certain strategy?
Not particularly. Where, you know, there's a couple of cool payment apps that just help you manage finances and like keep throwing up numbers every now and then. So I think those are helpful. I think the other way to think about it is you're paying 90,000 or 100,000 for the, you know, as a fixed cost for the tuition. So all of these expenses over and above are usually like 10, 20, 30%. It's almost like the variable cost required to milk the fixed cost that you're already incurring. So I don't really think that it's substantially more.
Yeah, that's great. I actually think those indications, guys, that's the first insight for everyone, the indications of the total cost of admission that is published on the websites of the schools. That's actually, as our current students say, that's a very accurate indication and you can count it in. When you're planning or calculating the ROI of the MBA. And let's switch to that perspective. So you guys, before starting the MBA, you had this information about the total cost of attendance. Did you calculate some ROI, what is your planning? How do you think of it? And is it something that you really took into consideration when, for example, deciding on a school? Any thoughts on that? Just whoever wants to start.
I mean, it depends quite a lot on your financing situation before the MBA. So, if you're sponsored by the company, it differs remarkably versus if you're fully debt funded. So I think that's one consideration. And then over and above, you look at typically the average salary payout after a business school program. You see how much expenses you're going to incur, and you kind of calculate like a payback period, depending on some modest understanding of expenses over the next couple of years. I think they say it differs between a 1 year and a 2 year program, but I think it's easy to say that anywhere between 1 to 3 years is like the usual payback period for an MBA, unless you're fully debt funded. And then, of course, it's much more.
Okay, thank you. And any other opinions or ideas on ROI, how to calculate it, and whether there are any hidden sources of information that we don't know yet?
I'd like to add that coming from my industry in particular, while I considered the ROI in particular, I also considered the barriers that an MBA would help me break past. And with that comes, an increase in salary, of course. So I definitely considered it as a necessary step for me in my career, and that I weighed that almost equally with the ROI for my MBA. But I basically will almost double my salary from where I was coming from and to where I was going with the help of an MBA, which is definitely a nice thing.
Yeah, sounds good. Sounds like a pretty good investment. Marina, how about you? So you have to continue your studies after graduation. So you have a little bit different business case. How did you approach your planning, and did the price tag on MBA and your plans, did it scare you at some point of time? How did you handle this?
Yeah, so the way that I approached it was, for me, I actually considered which schools offered more financial aid or merit-based scholarships, and I was kind of determining based on that. That's how I ultimately ended up deciding which schools gave me the most scholarship money, to be honest. But that I tried my best to not choose that at the beginning. So when I was applying, I was looking at schools that offered, like everyone I said, I think what Sid said about, what the salaries are after graduation, and to see, how much money I'd be making. My salary would have, I think, will triple, if not more than that, from before, because I'm on the younger side. So I was not making much money at all before, and I didn't save much before coming to MBA. And so for me, I knew that it's going to be a long-term investment, but I wanted to limit as much money that I needed to spend during school, just because I didn't have as many savings to help pay for things during school. So for me, it was more of I know it's an investment, but I know there's going to be great returns from it. But I tried to limit as much of what I was putting in by getting scholarships.
Fantastic. We'll come back to the question of scholarship, because some of our viewers are also asking questions, and I encourage everyone to put questions here. And thanks to our chat moderators for picking some of them. Sid, let's come back to the shorter MBA, 1 year MBA, kind of what you're doing. Did you opt for this program because of ROI? So kind of counting that the ROI of a 1 year program is better than the ROI of a 2 years program? Or did you have some other explanations or reasons why you picked that program?
I'll be completely transparent. So, I was going to get sponsorship from my employer, and it was going to be for 1 year tuition only. So from that perspective, and ROI, as well as just the tenure for which I wanted to be out of work, it all just made sense. And also the 1 year MBA sort of in this scenario provided a lot of flexibility to be in different geographies, versus being limited to one geography, for over a year and a half. So that was pretty much it. And yes, of course, from an ROI perspective, like if you work through the summer, you already sort of end up making a lot of your expenses through the year. So that essentially helps reduce, sort of expenses and increase the ROI over the 1 to 2 year period.
Yeah, that's what Ivan is going to do now to pay for all her clothes that she shopped. Yeah, Ivan, how about you? Were you like deciding between 1 or 2 years program, and is ROI something that you took into consideration?
I definitely considered it. So I actually only looked at 2-year programs. That seemed to be 2-year full-time in-person programs are the ones that I targeted. I felt that would be the best for my my personality, my career development, just me as a person. But like Marina, I also considered heavily the schools that offered scholarships to me, and then ultimately chose the one that provided the most in terms of monetary scholarship as well as opportunity. Like Carolina offers the Dean's Fellows. I'm sure both of your schools do as well. And that was something that really attracted me to Carolina and ultimately swayed my decision. But yes, I do. I am trying to cut back on the clothing expenses for sure.
That's cool. Thank you very much, Marina. So because you're so planned your program so intensely, maybe you can pick up this question of one of our viewers who is asking like whether there is any difference in terms of ROI or generally potential salary increase between master's programs and MBA, because like in many people's perception, MBA is something after which you start to get crazy money, and master's is kind of omitted. Do you have any idea, any thoughts about this? Is master also something to consider for our viewers and applicants?
Yeah, I can't speak too much to it. The only really experience that I have with anything with masters was, so I came from an accounting background before, and so I had a lot of my coworkers who did a master's in accounting. That's about the only really experience that I have with masters versus going to MBA, and depending on what path within business you want to take. And so specific to accounting, for them, masters was actually more worth it and more of an ROI because they wanted to stay within that industry. But for me, I really was only considering law school and MBAs, and I'm planning to do both. And so I wasn't really considering any other master's programs. So I don't think I can speak too much to it. So I don't want to say anything that would not be helpful.
Yeah, thanks anyway. And so the next question would be, let's come back to the topic of scholarships, because it's something what everyone finds really interesting. How did you learn about any scholarships available, and what scholarships are there existing at your school? Just what types of scholarships are there, and would you give any recommendations to anyone who is applying now to consider it? And when does the application actually happen? Marina, let's stay with you.
Sure. So for scholarships, there's quite a few. The ones that I know for sure from Anderson, there's a couple merit-based ones. So there's consortium and there's Forte, which are ones that are more identity-based and also related to need-based as well. So I'm actually a Forte fellow, which is the scholarship that's given for women. And so both of those, consortium and Forte, I highly recommend applying through. Forte you don't apply through. So consortium you apply through, which I highly recommend. I think it's a great way to apply into schools, and you build this community right away if you become a consortium fellow. For Forte, I highly recommend looking into the Forte MBA launch program and going to different Forte forums that they have where all of the different schools come to about a year in advance of when you're planning to apply. That's when you join the program. I didn't actually end up doing that program, but I know a lot of people who did, and I'm actually pretty heavily involved in Forte now as a fellow at Anderson. And so that's something that I heavily recommend. Anderson also has second year fellowships. So once you are already currently a student, they have a list of, I think it was like 30 scholarships maybe that we had that was given to us that you could apply to for your second year. They're based on industries, and it's open to basically any industry. And there's a ton that are for entrepreneurs. There's a huge push for that at Anderson. And so there's a bunch, if you're trying to start your own companies, there's a lot of money that can be given there. And then some are just generic merit-based, the top people in the class, things like that. But I really appreciated that there was access not only just for your first year, but also for your second year, specifically at Anderson.
Fantastic. Even how about you? Did the school provide you with some information about the scholarships up front, or did you have to do the whole research yourself?
So I would like to agree with Marina, and basically in everything that she said. I'm also a Forte fellow, and I highly recommend it. The programming is just great and spectacular for women people who identify as female, and it's just a great program. And then also consortium as well. Carolina, I believe obviously they have merit and need-based scholarships, but I believe that you don't really apply for it. There's an opportunity for you to submit an additional essay, I guess, where you could highlight possibly, how you can contribute to the community, or clubs that you want to be involved in, and they take that into consideration when they award you a scholarship with your application. My recommendation is to be upfront with it, and to, if you possibly don't receive the financial scholarship that you were hoping for, be honest and open and communicate with the admissions counselors and say, like, this is what another school's offered me, or this is what I'm hoping for. And sometimes they will work with you and possibly award you, a higher financial scholarship, which is great. And there are a couple second-year scholarships as well, but those are either you're nominated by your classmates, or it's something that you've achieved in your first year, or you were nominated by faculty and staff for those.
Thank you. That's really interesting to hear that basically there are very different scholarships, right? Some of them are merit based, some of them are need based, or like Marina put it, also identity based. So actually there is something for everyone. There are lots of like search engines to search for potential scholarships. Just go and Google that, and maybe there is something that would boost your confidence in terms of financing your MBA. Sid, one thing you mentioned that you are getting the corporate the employer scholarship. Mm-hmm. And does it mean that you're you're financed by the employer? Sorry. Does it mean that you're excluded from participating in different scholarships, or is there still something you can get in addition to pay for other costs?
I think personally, from what I remember, you're excluded from any scholarship if you're funded partially or fully by any company on campus. Yet I believe there are some firms that sort of fund your second year MBAs, like Ivan mentioned. In those scenarios, you can probably apply for a scholarship and then also get the second year sponsorship by a company after you recruit into them after the summer or some such. But I think at least where INSEAD is concerned, as long as you're a company-sponsored candidate, you wouldn't be eligible for scholarships.
Thanks. That's important. And if we talk about the perspective, like how much would you earn after the MBA? There are these employment reports on which you would see the average salary, but I'm sure you also talk to alumni to just get the feeling of whether something that is put on paper is actually true. What insights did you get from such talks? We have a viewer here asking how accurate are various data points on 5-year gains mentioned in many of the rankings. We'll ping you with this question in 5 years anyway, but did you get any insights from alumni? Anyone?
I think based on what I've seen so far, the numbers are borderline correct, but there's a hidden meaning to them, right? So I think someone in chat already mentioned this joining bonus bit. So if you're kind of taking that into account into the average calculation, then that's skewed because you're not going to be making that amount of money every year thereon. And then similarly, the average figure is a mix of some really high salaries and then some below par salaries. So it's kind of important to see the distribution, because it could just be consulting or IB or a couple of these fields pulling up the average salary quite a lot for some schools that depend a lot on these two areas for their recruitment through the year.
Also, going off of Sid's point, a lot of schools do have entrepreneurs, like Marina said. We have quite a few people that go out of their MBA and either launch businesses, or they join VC, or they take on opportunities that might be incredible opportunities in terms of experience, but don't pay as much as you might would hope for right out of the gate, I guess. And so that skews the numbers a little bit as well. So always something to consider when you speak with people at the school, and just to learn a little bit about where people are going after their MBA and how their salaries relate to those occupations and industries.
Yeah, same applies to nonprofits, right, and social enterprise, and also check out with the school, because some schools are supporting this actually, so giving you the chance to get a little bit more flexibility. So you could they could either compensate part of the loan or pay you out some certain scholarships. So the websites of the schools is actually the best source of information for you to make decisions. Let's continue and pick another question, and actually. Let's talk about housing, because once applying for housing options, one could see a range of different things, from really small rooms up to very fancy studios. How did you approach this choice, and do you have any suggestions on how to save money there? And is it even something that you would save money on? That I'm also interested in. Marina.
Yeah, sure, I can go. So I actually moved from San Francisco to LA. So SF is a lot more expensive than living in LA. So for me, it actually felt really nice, like moving from, I mean, I can be completely transparent. My studio that I was paying was like $2,400 a month. I'm paying less than $1,000 a month from that. Like I'm paying $1,400 a month, but like it's a big difference for me from monthly payment that I was paying before MBA. But in order to do that, I live in a 3-bedroom, 3-bath. And so that was the biggest thing for me, is I was trying to live with at least 2 other people living in a 3-bedroom. But it's a lot more reasonable. A lot of people at Anderson tend to live a couple miles away from campus, not directly by it. A lot of people tend to drive around in LA as opposed to walking, or you could take the bus. So that was something for me for housing, was I considered things that were a little bit further away, but also have to keep in mind, especially in a place like LA, if you live too far, you have to take the 405, then, you know, you add gas, driving farther and things like that. So for me, I think for saving money for housing, it was definitely having roommates and trying to live a little bit further away, but not too far that it's going to be a super long commute, and just weighing all of that. But Anderson made it really easy. We had a list that was given to us by the second years for us, of just like, here's like sign up with roommates and find people. And it was a really easy process, and everyone was kind of on the same boat of where to live and how to save money on housing.
Anyone else?
I mean, in France and specifically Fonty, there's a lot of context behind the housing market. Like, it works very differently from literally any other place that you do in MBA. There are these big shared houses, like chateaus, literally, where you can have 15 people living together. That's where all the parties are, etc. And you're going to pay a good amount of money just to be living in a big shared house. There's obviously other smaller studios which are more secluded. You get space to yourself, etc. So there's a wide range that you can be spending. I went from spending zero back home, because I was literally living in my own house, to spending $1,500 a month. For a good sized house. I mean, still is a lot of money, right? I've seen some friends on campus who are spending from 500 euros all the way up to about 2,000. So there is a wide spectrum. There's a lot of scope to save money if you start sort of searching in advance and you already know and are very clear on what you want exactly.
I'll go last. So Carolina, or North Carolina, is relatively inexpensive, which is nice. And so we have a wide variety of options for you to choose from. So there are on-campus opportunities, which are quite literally behind the business school. So it's a 2-minute walk at the most, which a lot of people do choose to do that. And some are furnished, some are unfurnished, and they're fairly inexpensive. And then Chapel Hill is a college town, so everything is relatively within walking distance, which is very nice, and relatively the same price. Whether you want to live right on our main street, which is called Franklin Street, you can live in nice apartment complexes that are a little bit more expensive, but you can have a roommate and that brings the cost down. Or you can live in houses all around the town of Chapel Hill. Everything is either a walk or a bike ride to campus, which is nice, and then also to our downtown, which is relatively small, but it's fun. And I live with a roommate that I wanted to bring my costs down a little bit, and I have I think it's a 1,300 or a 1,500 square foot apartment, and it's like $800 a month, which is wildly cheap for most people in most cities. So definitely an affordable place to live. And like Marina said, a lot of resources from second years that were helpful for us as well.
Fantastic. And how did you find your roommate? So were you assigned to the same room, or did you have a chance to ask for a certain roommate? And is there always an option only to have also a classmate, or you could also meet someone from undergrad or other grad school?
Sure. All of Carolina's graduate schools are in a very close proximity to one another. So you can join different forums or different Facebook groups or LinkedIn groups and find roommates across all of the graduate programs, which is nice. But also Carolina sends out a Facebook group and a LinkedIn group that you can connect with your cohort class and find a roommate there. A lot of people did that. I actually am a double Tar Heel, so I went to Carolina for my undergraduate degree as well. And my roommate is also a double Tar Heel. And so we knew each other through friends in undergrad, and then found out we were both coming to school and thought it would be an easy and fun living situation for us both.
Probably was especially cool, considering COVID situation, because then probably doesn't feel so lonely, right?
Yes, I was very appreciative of having a roommate for COVID, because at times it does feel lonely, and you are all in my bedroom right now, which is where I spent most of my first year of MBA school, which is, interesting at times, but it was nice to have a roommate, for someone who was also going through it and knew, we could talk about classes. We kind of did class together in our living space at times, so it was nice, definitely.
Fantastic. Let's pick up the next question. And actually, when you were applying and when you were deciding on a school, did you consider certain scholarships that were offered if they were school specific, or would you recommend to decide based on just what you want to pursue, or where do you want to have your MBA studies, and completely ignore these numbers? Because for many people, of course, sometimes it feels like the money that is offered is a huge sum of money, and then you think, okay, I would rather probably go to this school which offers me the scholarship. Is it the strategy that you would recommend, or do you have a different view on this? Just pick up the question, whoever wants.
I mean, I personally say, one should go for the school first strategy and then decide different financing options, etc. Because you're going to do an MBA only once, and literally a decade from now, you're not going to look back at $10,000 or $20,000 thinking that that was a needle mover, so to say. So I would certainly suggest school first and then financing. I believe there are some school-specific sponsorships which could make you feel more inclined towards them, but that shouldn't definitely be the only criteria.
I would agree. I looked at my own personal career path and which school would help me with that, and then cost of living did factor into my decision, definitely. But it's something that you will figure out regardless, and it's something that your school will help you figure out. And like Sid mentioned, it's something that 20 years from now you will look back and think about how great the school was and the program was, and the difference in $20,000 to $30,000 extra hopefully won't make too big of a difference.
Marina, do you share this opinion? Yeah,
I don't have too much to add to that. I pretty much agree. I think I definitely considered school first, but I think it, of course, depends on your financial situation. So obviously, if financing does need to be a pretty big factor, I think it's trying to find a way to blend that with all the other factors that you would use to determine. I think for me, location was a big factor because I do want to stay in California, and so I wanted a lot of my network to be here. And so I was literally between complete opposites, thinking Cornell and Ithaca versus LA, complete opposites of the country. And ultimately came down to location, but also scholarship. But I think definitely looking at them hand in hand is key. And I agree with everything else that both Sid and Evan said.
Fantastic. And now looking at your budget, what are the biggest expenses of yours, excluding the tuition fee?
I think trips for sure. Trips and socializing and just travel. So flights and hotels and Airbnbs, I think that's top of the list. Pretty close to the yearly rental, actually.
I agree. I also found a love of cooking in COVID, and so I feel like my grocery bill is a lot higher than it really should be. But when you're not socializing as much outside of the home, cooking is a fun activity, and my roommate and I do it. Hopefully, we'll continue to split expenses there, but that's definitely somewhere I've spent more money than I probably should have this year.
Yeah, it was the same for me. Either I didn't socialize as much this past year, but for me, food was a huge expense. I think I also falsely came in thinking that I would be provided with a lot of free food. And I think traditionally that does happen quite a bit because you'll have company events on campus and all of the second years were like, oh yeah, you can go get food whenever they're coming. But we didn't have that. So hopefully it'll go back to that where food won't be as big of an expense. But for me, I hadn't budgeted it because I assumed that I would be getting free food. So that's probably my biggest one for sure.
That's cool. And let's come back to the topic of trips. And actually, it's really cool that you mentioned this because probably once COVID is completely, has completely passed, there will be even more trips. How would you recommend to approach this? Because again, social pressure, most of people are going on the trips. How do you decide which trip to join and how do you manage your budget, travel budget? Marina, let's stay with you.
Sure, yeah. So the way that we tend to do it is we have different treks, and basically a lot of students who are from different regions will tend to organize these trips that are happening if we're traveling internationally. And it tends to be, honestly, the way it's worked, even there was like a Hawaii trip and a couple of other trips like that that are a little closer, but tends to be that there's like this big group on Slack that gets joined, and then you find like your smaller groups of people, like depending on the budget you want to spend, just saying that, okay, I want to live and spend this much money when I'm traveling there, or we'll take this flight because it's cheaper or something like that. So you tend to find your group of people that is kind of within your budget, and then to see if it want to be cheaper or you want to spend a little bit more. But it tends to be like all organized. Like we have like student leaders who are organizing it, and then you just find your little group that you're with. And that's kind of how it went this past year, and I think traditionally happens.
Evan, how about you? And would you even recommend to save on such trips or all in?
So I would agree with Marina. We had a couple people that were really good at planning trips, and then you grouped up with a little group that was willing to spend as much as you were, and then that was nice because there was activities for everybody to do. I think there were a couple trips that I decided to pass on, which I felt like in the long run were good decisions for me. I had either been to that place or I didn't really see that I needed to join for that trip, and I ended up saving money there. So I think just knowing yourself and knowing what you want to do and where you want to spend your money, and not feeling too pressured to join every trip. But they are fun, and it's a great way to meet your classmates and to see a new city or a new place. And especially if you're considering living there for a job or a career, to see it as an MBA student is a great opportunity. But I wish I had budgeted or saved for the traveling. I didn't as much as I probably could have before school, but I don't really have any savings tips other than that. Just know what you want to spend your money on and don't feel too pressured to go to everything.
Thank you. Sid, how about you? What factors do you consider when deciding on whether to join a trip or not, other than the budget? I understood the schools are actually getting more exclusive, it seems to me, from what I hear from you, offering different opportunities thanks to students' initiatives. What other factors do you consider?
I think just the fact that it's a one-year MBA, for me personally, it means half the amount of time available to even do trips, right? So you'd end up saying yes to every other trip more often than what you would for a 2-year program. It's like so there are 5 periods. There are essentially 4 breaks in between. And there's some of the other trips that are organized for each of these breaks. And you kind of get access to past itineraries from like alums and stuff. And you have a good sense of budget, you have a sense of what's going, similar to what Marina said, there's a Telegram group where, you start like getting quotes and etc. You can actually make a very informed decision on which place you want to go to and how much you want to spend and who you want to go with. And then after that, all of us are rational, grown-up adults to make those choices for us. But I think from what I've seen at INSEAD so far, I've just seen a lot of FOMO. So people would end up going for literally every trip that's out there, even during the breaks and even over like long weekends and stuff. So safe to say that a trip every month or month and a half could be budgeted, could be a short trip. So say about 5 to 6 trips for the full year at least.
Yeah, right. Even maybe I can come back to the same question regarding deciding on the trips. I heard from lots of people whose families live nearby. So let's say you study in the US and your family is in the US, that they really struggle to choose like whether you go and visit your family for Thanksgiving break or you actually doing a trip with the classmates. How did you approach this?
So this was the first time in my life that I haven't spent Thanksgiving with my family, and I really wish I could have, but because of COVID, it wasn't safe. And I ended up actually we had a little staycation with a lot of people that were in the same situation. And we had a Thanksgiving together, which was fun and a good way to, celebrate together. I think that's tough. I'm from North Carolina. My family is very close. I'm an hour away from them. So I probably chose trips with friends and classmates over family a few more times than I should have. But I think that's just a person-to-person situation where you really need to consider how often you'll get to see them, after your program, and just weigh it individually, really.
Thank you. We have a very nice question about the corporate funding. I'll bring it up here, so maybe that's for you, Sid. How does this funding actually work? So can you just go and request it, or in your situation, was it like a specific program that you knew about, and are there any negative aspects of it so that one would say, no, I would not take it, I would just continue and quit my job?
So it pretty much differs company by company. I've now come across a bunch of different sponsored candidates, even on campus. It seems like it's a formalized policy now. So literally when you get your offer, you write to HR or whoever manages talent acquisition for you, and you essentially convey to them the intent on going for a business school program. And then thereafter, it's a very formalized process. You get approvals from the office head, etc. I would say the amount of funding and the amount of period that you need to serve at the firm after you do business school differs. Even within Bain, for example, it differs office to office. India has a different policy. Amsterdam has a different one. Canada is different. So depending on where you're from and where you're going back to, the amount of sponsorship that you get, the amount of housing allowance you get on top of it, and some of the other benefits will differ drastically. I think in terms of negative aspects, it's almost like there's a sort of complacency that sets inside, right? Literally, you get into the MBA and you don't want to explore other opportunities or jobs and stuff. So you kind of know where you're headed, so you don't give in your best to the extent that you probably could have. I think that's one. And the other one is, of course, if you've committed to, like, let's say, serving 1 to 2 years at the firm after the MBA, then that's a choice that you've made and you have to live with it. Otherwise, you pay back the money with interest. So, yeah.
That's interesting. Thank you for these insights. And Marina, in your personal situation, correct me if I'm wrong. So did you take any loan? And maybe you could, if yes, could you give us some like really basic details about how the student loan actually worked? Like, what is the interest? Is it close to consumer credit? Anything, because there's really not that much information out there.
Yeah, unfortunately, I did not take loans. My scholarship paid for a good chunk, and then the rest was savings, and my parents, fortunately, are helping me out, so I cannot speak to it. I don't know if Sid can, maybe Evan could have, but I know she had to hop off, but I can't speak to loans, unfortunately.
Okay, thanks. Then we'll just move to the next question, which would actually be my last question. Is there something you wish you had known? So something that you would now recommend to the incoming students and to the applicants about the cost of the MBA, about the budget planning, savings, anything?
I think the one thing for me would be moving, let's say, from APAC to Europe. Just transfer of money is pretty complicated, and you can be charged upwards of 5 to 10% of fees for like transferring money on a monthly or a recurring basis. So getting that sorted early on is very helpful. So I was working in Munich last year, so I had savings in a German bank account. So that really helped right? Like just fund a bunch of expenses. But from what I've heard, like people are paying up to 5 to 10% of their total expenditure in just moving money across borders. So I think that's an important consideration.
Marina, your concluding remark?
Yeah, I think for me is just kind of a summary of what I said before. Just I definitely think I wish that I would have saved more money for trips and even for clubs. That it's just a little bit of extra money that I hadn't thought about, and I think saving it just would have made me not feel pressured or have like a little bit of a headache now when I'm in school. It's just a little extra. And I think that way also it helps when you're deciding schools that you don't have to necessarily be weighing the scholarships more. You can actually focus on the school. So I think that's my parting advice is just save that little bit extra and it'll help make the experience more fun.
Thanks, fantastic. And thanks everyone who has watched this session. We hope that we were able to give you lots of information about how to finance your MBA, what are the hidden costs and what are the possible strategies for managing your costs. It was really nice to have you guys here, that you showed us different perspectives and different individual situations, because this proves that everyone can manage and handle his situation in a personal way according to his personal preferences and just strategize how he wants. Thank you very much for taking part in this panel. Thank you everyone who watched it, and you will be able to view the session as a recording. It will be saved, and keep on joining the following sessions of the MBA Spotlight. Thank you very much and have a nice day. Goodbye.